So, good afternoon, everyone. I know it's been a long day, but we promise to keep it interesting. We're going to start like any panel starts with a brief round of introductions from left to right. Can you briefly introduce yourself, name of your company, etc.?
With me? Okay. My name is Alberto Yepez. I'm from Palo Alto, California. I'm a managing director with TRIDENT Capital. Been an entrepreneur for 20 years. I worked at Apple for 10 years, and now I moved to venture capital. And I'm very happy and proud to have been the largest investor for AlienVault. Today I'm chairman of the board, and I met Julio, who was the founder of AlienVault. And that's the reason I'm very committed to Spain to build an ecosystem to make sure that we have more examples of successful startups that can actually become global companies and global leaders.
Thank you.
So my name is Julio Casal. I'm the co-founder of AlienVault, a company that was established in Spain, year 2007, relocated to Silicon Valley, year 2010, and had another 3 funding rounds, year 2011, 12, 13, starting with Alberto Yepez, TRIDENT Capital, and including Kleiner Perkins, Sigma Capital, and some other around 6 such Silicon Valley funds.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so I'm Javier Agüera. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I found 5 companies since I was 15. And I live now between Silicon Valley and Madrid. I'm jumping between, and my last adventure is called BLACKPHONE. So we make basically these phones that are secure smartphones that protect your privacy.
Right, for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Wauters. I'm a journalist. Started a small media company called TECH.EU. And we write about tech in the EU. Surprise, surprise. Actually, 10 years ago, when I was a student, I very briefly lived in Madrid. But I didn't stay, and that's what the topic of this panel is about. Should I stay or should I go? And coincidentally, if you look at Javier and Julio were both born here in Madrid. Alberto, you're from Peru, but all 3 of you live in California. So tell me, each one of you, tell me how you got there in the first place.
Well, mine was kind of easy. So I was at university studying telecom engineering, and I had the chance to finish my bachelor's degree my last year at Santa Clara University. So at the same time, I was running GeeksPhone, which is now BLACKPHONE, and it was a good moment to jump to Silicon Valley. So I kind of did both at the same time, got a student visa, and worked undercover the student visa, and that's it.
And you're moving back to the USA next week on a new visa, right?
Next week, yeah, I changed my visa.
Good timing for this panel.
Now I'm legally moving to the US.
Finally, legally. Julio,
Nice,
how did you end up?
So I always wanted to go to California, Silicon Valley. So we launched several companies here in Spain until we got the good idea to create an open source community, and then later on build a product upon that. And then we worked maybe 7, 8 years preparing all that community, all that global brand, until we really thought we had the opportunity to jump in a secure way and that was year 2010. And that's the story. We relocated, both founders, and well, everything worked. And I live, it's 4 years now. I live there, and I plan to stay some other years and continue.
My story is a little bit different. I went to school in Peru to study electronic engineering, and I got a scholarship from the Jesuits. I went to the University of San Francisco, which is the same as the USTU or other Jesuit universities. And when I graduated with my computer science degree in electronic physics, Apple recruited me on campus. And I spent 10 years at Apple, which changed my life in many ways, and I became an entrepreneur. I founded 3 different companies. All of them got acquired. Worked at Oracle for 2.5 years because it was the last company they got acquired, and then eventually moved to the dark side, which is venture capital, because I have a passion to build businesses with high-performing teams.
Right, and obviously you stayed in USA. So this whole notion of should I stay or should I go is a question that for some reason keeps on popping up, like every conference, every panel about entrepreneurship when it comes to Europe. And the question is always, should I stay or should I go? Only has one logical answer, and that's it depends, right? Depends on what your business is like, where your target audience is. But there is this notion that an entrepreneur once he's successful, kind of has to open an office in the US at some point, simply because of market size, because most of the big technology companies that you partner with or that become clients of yours are based there. The platform companies are there, you know, the Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, etc. But in recent times, that's kind of changed, because if you look at a company like Zalando, for example, just went public and doesn't have any you know, operations in the US at all. King also went public this year, gaming company that has loads of offices all over Europe, and only, I think, about 5-6 people in the US. Another example is BlaBlaCar, just raised a $100 million round, and in their pitch deck wasn't a single mention of the US. Not one, from what I heard. So you can actually build large, sustainable companies in Europe without making the move to the US. But for you guys, it actually made a lot of sense to go to the US. Yeah. So tell me more about, you know, why did you move the company to the US and why it makes sense for you specifically?
So there's many people that decide to move to the US, especially Silicon Valley, because they're looking for money or they're looking for engineers. They don't realize that the competition there is so big that it's actually easier here, even though there's less in amount, but it's more variety. So we actually moved there, as you say, more for the partners. So most of the companies we end up working with, like Intel or NVIDIA, are there, and there's the headquarters, and I can take my bike, and in 15 minutes I'm in their office. And time difference is a big issue for us. So mainly for that issue, and then well, clients and in our case, it's not so big for the market, because in mobile, US market is saturated, same as Europe. For us, Asia Pacific or Latin America is much, much more interesting. But technology-wise, it makes sense to be there because it's where everything happens.
Right.
Well, in my opinion, so I mean, well, first of all, I think there's many ways of doing things. So, and the most important thing for an entrepreneur is to build things their own way, following their own intuition and following their own way of. So you don't necessarily have to follow any pattern, no? But in our case, in my experience with Elimbo, and now I also joined a venture capital recently as a venture partner, and we are trying to replicate this model. The model was, and that worked, and that was very successful, was building a dual model. So we kept the engineering team. It's still here. It's been growing. It's great. Has lots of advantages. But we relocated all the front-end sales, marketing, and finance, no? Which is, and there's this extremely known well capacities in the Silicon Valley. So that dual model worked for us, and I think it's well, in my opinion, it also depends on your view. I mean, if you are going to be in a global market, Alberto always talks about it, or you're going to be in a local, in a different place, you can follow that.
Yeah, from my perspective, I agree with you. It depends. There's always, you need to figure out what type of business you're building, right? If it's a regional business and the market is big enough, the regional investors will actually see the opportunity, and you can create a big business, a public company. Eventually, you can merge with other businesses to get more complementary. But you're trying to build a global company, then it's a very different perspective, and I think the US is one of the better places to do it. It's not the only one, but the only reason is because eventually you want to take your company public, or you want to be acquired by a global company that may be based in the US, and typically the public markets or the US companies that are going to acquire you are looking for that corporate governance, all the audits, all the stuff that will actually make it easy for them to actually perform the transactions. Been very fortunate to be speaking in many forums in Startup Chile, been involved with the government of Singapore in their initiatives to foster entrepreneurship, Canada, Spain now driving it. But I always feel that a lot of entrepreneurs says, I really need to go to the US. And the answer is no, not really. Be careful. Because sometimes if you have a regional business and you go and try to pitch to a VC, right. An investor, I'm going to build a ride sharing for Europe. That doesn't fit my model, right? In my case, we look for building global businesses. What Julio was building started in Spain, was an open source community which was trying to simplify the issue of security, which is a big issue, and did a tremendous job, and had a validation aspect. They had a number of customers that downloaded the product, and he already started moving to the commercial sector. And when we saw that, we said that the opportunity was global.
Yep.
And so we partnered with Julio, with Adara, which was the original investor that actually initially invested in AlienVolt, and then we brought the scale. Right? Julio didn't let us put too much money, but we gave him $8 million in the first series. But within 24 months since we invested, we brought in $60 million to build the company. We attracted, 12 months later, $22 million from some pretty good VCs, and then $30 million. We haven't used all that money. Again, don't get crazy. Resources are more expensive, et cetera. The whole point is, if you're building a global business, make sure that there's places where you will do it better, and there's infrastructure to be able to do that, and never go across the pond or the ocean without having validation with customers in your own region, because otherwise people will not listen.
Got it. So a couple of points in there that I want to touch on. So AlienVolt now is a global company, no question. What are some of the mistakes you've made in this whole expansion story?
What are the mistakes we made? Oh, man.
The major ones, not all of
He
them.
didn't take enough money from me.
Yeah, for example, we always underestimated the money you need. No? So if I look at from back, if I look back,
Sorry, was that
I will never
the money needs?
the quantity of money. No?
Right.
So kind of so AlienVolt is really now in the global vendor. It's really in a very high position. No? So
Is that because of the salaries are higher, but also because the cost of living in?
well, in our model, which is we went into Silicon Valley, we took teams, Silicon Valley teams. We created a complete executive team, Silicon Valley. First time we brought 8 executives from HP, very, very high level. And in the second, after the third round, we brought another complete team of marketing and sales from a very high level SolarWinds company. So that's very, very expensive. So those teams are definitely expensive. Right. So I would never have thought you need this quantity. Now I really realized that. So, and that's maybe another reason you want to go there. You have this funding, no? These funding capacities.
Right.
One thing that I would want Julio to comment is we had discussions in early days to say, okay, we're going to invest, we're going to try to build this big business, and do you want to be the CEO? And that's one of the questions that a lot of the entrepreneurs are trying to build a company, because you feel so much pride, and it's your baby, you don't want to let it go, or it's your car, you don't want to give somebody the keys to be able to drive it. I remember we had that discussion, and I gave him a white paper that says, do you want to be king or do you want to be rich? Maybe you should talk a little bit about that, because you had successfully transitioned from being a startup founder and CEO to now being a board member, and now you're building another company.
Totally. So it's very hard to let your baby in the hands of other people, especially if you don't know them at all and they don't talk your language and they don't have your culture. And so I think now I'm going to talk about successes, not failures, not mistakes. So I think we had a lot of success ourselves building that community and taking the company to Silicon Valley. That was successful, and that was our success. But from that, what I think the really big success was to be able to acquire good partners. And then ourselves step back. So we left space, lots of space for guys like Alberto, then the CEO, the executive team that we have, Kleiner Perkins, to get ownership, to feel that this is their baby, not only our baby. Yeah. No? So they really push and work. And so that opened for us all these closed gates of Silicon Valley, because it's not obvious to go to Silicon Valley and open all that. It's a very close place. No? And there was a chain of confidence started by Alberto that went into this executive team. Then they brought Kleiner Perkins, which is top of the, and those guys brought the market and sales team. All that would have been totally impossible for me to acquire. But there was all this.
Javier, do you want to be king or do you want to be rich?
Well, it's tricky. I agree with that. We haven't faced the money issue in the sense that we realized early on that the engineering in Spain would work, and we didn't need to fight for Stanford or I don't know, Berkeley engineers, and that was too tough. So we kept engineering where it is. But that at the same time brought a big problem that we didn't think about in the beginning. And it has to do a lot with where you go, not only Silicon Valley, but also Europe, because We're a company that's headquartered in Geneva, with the research and development mostly in Spain, with an office where the CEO and the CFO is in Washington, D.C., and 2 offices in California, and then salespeople around the world. And that creates a huge issue in a 50-people company because people are not in the same place and not even the same time zone. And we underestimated the problems of having people that just work 9 hours away from each other. And especially when you have like production in China and things everywhere, it's tricky. And when you have a big corporation, you cannot avoid it because you have teams worldwide.
Right.
But when you're a small company and you're building your corporate culture, not having people in the same place is bad for work efficiency because of time zone, but also for building the spirit of the company and the working culture. That is very, very important when you're very small and without many resources.
Right. So something else that I want to touch on, because we have this whole discussion of should I stay or should I go, it's not necessarily only Europe, US, it's also what we see, at least from the entrepreneurs that we speak to, is a lot of companies in the economies that are in shambles, including Spain, Greece, Italy. A lot of developers and entrepreneurs are moving to places like Berlin and London to join startups or start their own companies simply because they see more possibilities and more talent to hire, and cost of living is reasonable in Berlin, but there are more opportunities. Specifically you, Javier, because you're obviously a younger generation, do you see a lot of people around you in this entrepreneurial community making those moves, and do you support that? Do you think that's a good?
I see that. I don't see that many people moving out just to start something, unless you know the place you are before, because you have already, you already have lots of challenges around you. You have to raise the funding, you have to define your business plan, find your people, get going, get your office, get everything going. And if you don't know the city, that's like an extra lot of problems that may take a lot of your time that you're not investing on your business. Right. But what I see is people that get the things started at the beginning, get enough funding, get things going and get enough funding so that they can make the jump. Because I've seen many people just going to Silicon Valley and just the money that you have for Spain that will last you 6 months, it lasts 1 month there or 2 months maximum. So I've seen people with a very solid business model and things going, and they just raised the fund and say, okay, it's time to go to Silicon Valley. Yeah. And didn't raise enough for doing that. So you have to choose the right moment. It's not at the beginning, it's not in the middle, it's when you're ready.
And that's actually a more interesting question than should I stay or should I go? The real question is, if I go, when do I make this jump? When's the right time to do this expansion to either US or Asia, wherever makes most sense for your business? Alberto, I want to get your perspective on this.
You know, I would say it's a self-fulfilling cycle, right? And we're beginning to see the early cycle in Spain. So when you're looking at companies like Alibaba and companies in India that went public, it's interesting. A lot of them went to school in the US. They work for companies, Apple, Sun, Google, and eventually, or they do their own startup, and they do it pretty well, and they go back to their countries, and they become the entrepreneurs, helping entrepreneurs, and eventually you create that ecosystem. So I would say that we're beginning to see Julio is back in Spain, working with a venture fund. He's really trying to foster that. I would encourage everybody that's been successful to go back to where your roots are and really help. With the earlier question you make, what were the mistakes? Because there are a lot of them. Startups are not easy, and the statistics of who makes it and who doesn't make it is very important. So I would say it's a self-fulfilling cycle where entrepreneurs learn and go and move forward. The other thing which is interesting, more about how can you be successful. I want to congratulate Sofia, Maria, for putting this forum, and it's my first time participating. Hopefully, it's not the last one. But I think it's not just about the money. It's not just about the entrepreneur or the university. What is missing is always the corporations. It's an ecosystem that you need. You have the lawyers, you have the infrastructure. But in Spain, in order to be successful, and you look at how startups in the US are successful, there's a lot of corporations that want to be linked towards innovation. Right. And they take early risk in using a product that oftentimes is not completely baked, is not at the commercial level than others. So I think Startup Summit is the beginning of creating that ecosystem. Without that ecosystem, I would say it will fail. I've seen the same thing happen with Startup Chile. I've seen the same thing happen with Singapore. And the other thing that is missing, besides the involvement of corporations to help the entrepreneur so that they can get innovation and entrepreneurship built into companies that have existed for a long time, in the case of Spain, hundreds of years even.
Right.
And the other thing is also trying to get that culture of risk, because if you fail in Silicon Valley, it's not like you go home. Now you have experience. Now I'm going to support you even
it's
more.
called a learning
It's
experience
the
there.
culture of risk,
But-
and that culture of trying to figure out, failing is okay as long as you learn and you are going to apply what you learn in the process. So I think it's the ecosystem that makes a big difference.
Yeah. What you mentioned in the beginning about this coming back, Javier, very straightforward devil's advocate question. Suppose that you build out this company and you spend your time mostly in the US and you get sold for, well, let's say $1 billion in a few years. Would you come back to Spain and, I don't know, actively support the community by becoming an angel investor, doing other initiatives? Or do you see yourself staying in the US permanently?
Do you mean coming myself personally or coming with my company?
No, personally.
Uh,
Would you try to
I
get back
think
to the community where you started?
So I don't plan to stay in the US for too long because I'm spoiled by the Spanish lifestyle. So I actually enjoy it more here. Probably I still need to see, I mean, I'm kind of young, so I want to see the world. I want to maybe live some time in Asia. But definitely, I'll actually like coming back to Spain. I come back to Spain every 2 months, 3 months, and I enjoy it a lot. I think that connection should be kept. And many people, especially in the government and more old school people, are very afraid that Spaniards go away. But when Spaniards go away, they do it for learning. Some people do it for need. Some people do it because they want to explore. But they normally want to come back because life here is good. And if you don't go out, you cannot enrich your people back. So it's something that is rewarding, and it's something that personally, in terms of personal life, I think it's interesting.
And the reason that I'm asking that question is because you probably all know this, but the European Commission is doing a lot of initiatives to try to promote entrepreneurship, for better or worse. And one of their slogans that they like to emphasize a lot is start in Europe, stay in Europe. And I always felt that it should be start in Europe, do whatever makes sense for your business, but please come back to Europe.
Yeah.
That would make more sense to me.
I like that.
Is that something that you agree with, Julio? Or?
Yeah, I would agree, but however, in today's world, I would say that in a global market with a global product, in many cases, it's a good idea to go to. That's the reality. And when I talk to the folks in this conference, most of them, I think, they're thinking. So I would add another level to this discussion, which is, okay, I mean, it's not only about if you want to go, but which is the questions that I've seen in the conference, which is, okay, but then I want to go. Now, how should I do it? Because, I mean, you can't go just to the Silicon Valley and appear and be successful. It's very difficult to do it. And you have to really prepare it. And then the when, I mean, it's really, time is key. You have to really go at the proper time with the proper preparation. And if you don't do it, you could easily, and we've seen it too many times, break your company, and be, yeah, I think it's the right, well, Silicon Valley is in a great situation right now, and it's reasonable to think that many people should try to go there, no? Of course, there's many ways of doing it. Now, how do you do it, and how and when? I would like to speak a bit about that, if it's possible. I don't know if we have time. And,
Alberto, any thoughts on?
You have many examples of European entrepreneurs, like the founders of Skype. They were successful, and now they have their fund is focused on the Nordic countries, and then eventually either they're regional businesses or global businesses, and they collaborate. The founder of WhatsApp, Eastern European, he's finally gotten his money because the deal just got approved.
It's more money than.
And he has a commitment to go back and try to do things. I was talking to a startup in Romania, and it was started by a professor, doing incredibly well. They're doing about $100 million in revenue, and they want to come to the US because they want to seek liquidity. But the only reason why they want to do that is they want to show that startups in Romania are really, they can be public. They could be a global business. And one of the one of the drivers of the founders, husband and wife, by the way, is that they want to come back and drive that, not only lead by example. You guys are great role models of people who have taken the risk and they successfully gone through that. And then I think that's why you see. Yeah. I think people will come back and make it. And,
even the fact that you're on this panel and sharing your insights,
absolutely.
helps a lot. So if you do make that move to the US, in your cases, tell me how different it is to hire an engineer in Silicon Valley compared to Madrid.
Well, the thing
and
is
not just more expensive, because I know that.
No. The thing is, it's not only hiring if you can find one because it's known, but the problem is that they are not loyal. And I think it was Martin Barsavsky yesterday. He was talking about this. Loyalty is a big issue because I think here in Spain and mostly Europe, because of the culture, you hire somebody, and even if the conditions are better outside of your company, the kind of promise that you have for the future is a good bond. In Silicon Valley, it's just the wild west. I mean, there's a huge rotation. People come and go. It's very rare that an engineer stays for more than 6-7 months. Just the average. I mean, there's experts that yes, they stay more. And you have to fight, and you have to offer like free vacation, and you have to offer free massage at your office, and free lunch and free dinner with a top chef, and all these things that Google, and then it comes Google and Facebook, they just hire for 100,000 or 150,000 recent graduates. It's just very difficult to compete. But what do you think? You have more experience on this. You've been on that for a while.
Well, you're the last of a very, very long chain, starting from Google, then Apple, then Facebook, then Twitter, then all the rest. And so that you're going to get what they don't, they can't hire. So I mean, we don't even try in both. We put some engineering team in Texas and US, but we grow here in Spain, which is a beautiful thing. It's,
what attracted us to Alienvolt was the engineering capability that was in Spain, not only in Madrid, but in Granada, and we had grown those teams. And we still love and continue to grow them, but we're also getting the challenge of keeping everybody is pretty tough because there's a lot of competition. You know, given that we're almost short of time, I want to give you a couple of perspectives on entrepreneurs and sometimes when they're raising money. And this is something that I learned myself, doing 3 different startups and now being in the venture side. You know, you should always start a company with the exit in mind. Let me repeat that again. Start a company with the exit in mind. Many of the businesses that we see outside the US, they become mom and pops or they become a family business. And they're so close, and yeah, they're great family offices and groups that evolve, but it never really creates that boom. So if you start a company with the exit in mind, it's clear that I'm going to build this company, either going to go public, it's going to get acquired, is the fact that you're going to get a chance to do it again. So if you are pitching to a VC, the venture capitalists, they give me money to invest and I get measure of how much I return. So if I don't see the exit, you pitch me and say, so when am I going to be able to realize gains so that I can raise the next fund and help? So always start your company with the exit in mind. Then, you know, decide whether it's a global business or a regional business. Make sure you focus on the intellectual property because the same idea you may have, somebody else will have, so you need to defend that. Your go-to-market has to be key and critical. I think one of the interesting things about Alienvolt, they became a global company with very little resources in Spain because they used the open source model where allow people around the world to download and became customers. By the time we invested in you, how many customers around the world you had?
Oh, well, maybe 60, 70 customers.
No, but the downloads.
Downloads, 200,000.
More than 1,000. So it's what is the market opportunity? What is the IP? What is your go-to-market strategy? In different stages, it changes. So the adoption of open source, eventually the team and the investors. So again, start a company with the exit in mind. It becomes clear.
I actually think that's a bit of a controversial statement because I don't think Facebook, for example, started with an exit in mind, and they did make it even despite that. Javier, did you start this company with an exit in mind?
No, I didn't even know how I started this company, but it's difficult for us. For us, the exit is very complex, except going public. Because it's very difficult if something acquires us, somebody acquires us, because the kind of how our industry works. But it really depends on your industry. Some industries are more prone to just corporate acquisitions. Some others, it's just growing very big and making it worth it. So I guess it's tricky. But it's something I'm going to say, and time is kind of tight. But I think Spanish engineers, and I say engineers, I say lawyers, I say whatever, have nothing to envy to Silicon Valley engineers. I studied in Spain 3 years. I spent my last year in the US. And I think that systematically, Spanish engineers outperform American engineers. The quality of the education is very good. Obviously, the ecosystem, the quality of everything that is not the studies, probably the professors are much better there. But the knowledge that you acquire and how capable are you against the real life for developing your work, Spanish engineers have nothing to envy. And it's just a matter of going there and doing it.
So as you mentioned, we're out of time. I guess the answer to the question, should I stay or should I go, is still the same. It all depends. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Well done.
Good job.